What are the best songs from Psalm 2? I'm Daniel Mount, joined today by my co-host, Pastor Chad Berry, and we'll answer that question on today's episode of the Expository Songs podcast. We've each picked 5 songs, and we haven't compared notes. Pastor Chad, what is your number 5 song?
Yeah, so coming in at number 5, and I'm going to mention just briefly a lot of the songs from Psalm 2. This happened with Psalm 1 as well. Many of the songs are the words of the psalm set to music, and so I wanted to make sure a couple of those were represented in my list, as well as some that kind of tried to more poetically articulate the meaning and such. But coming in at number 5 was one of those songs that was pretty much just the words of the psalm to music, just titled Psalm 2, I've Set My King in Zion, by Karl Kohlhase.
I'm not sure how to say it.
So for the listener, it's spelled Kohlhase, the last name, and Karl is spelled with a K, Karl. Very singable melody, really enjoyable song, could really be used in any kind of context, traditional or contemporary. Really well done piece.
Neat. And at number 5, I have Kiss the Sun by Jamie Soles, written and recorded by Jamie Soles. After I'd finalized my top 4, my 5th spot came down to a decision between 2 singer-songwriters who actually run in the same circles, Jamie and Brian Suave. Because Brian has a song called Psalm 2, Kiss Ye the Sun, with an incredibly cool and current arrangement and performance. This one, Jamie's song, is a 1997 song, and ultimately I decided that if it was this close a call, that quite possibly the song that was holding its own, despite a slightly more dated sound and 1990s recording style, was the better song. But they're both good. Jamie tackles the whole song sticking closely to his source text, and he does it really well.
I have that song as one of my honorable mentions.
Neat.
I really liked that particular song. Jamie's name is on my list. Just a different song.
Okay. Well, what do you have at your number 4 then?
So at number 4, I have As For Me, Psalm 2, sung by Christy Nockels. The main reason why I picked this song, as well as my number 3 pick, is they're both songs that kind of took the meaning of the text and did a really good job emphasizing the application. And as believers, when we think about the fact that Jesus reigns in Zion, that why do the nations rage and plot in vain? He who sits in the heavens laughs and holds them with derision. And the application of that and the hope that it ought to fill the believer, this particular song does really well. It is more fitting in a more of a contemporary context. I think we could probably use it in our context as an offertory, and it would be completely fine, or as a special. And Christy Nockels has got a really pretty voice too, so we just got to put that in there.
Yeah, that was an honorable mention for me, and not just an honorable mention. I think it was my last one to make the cut before I got down to my top 5, along with the other one I mentioned. That made it right up there till the end and very nearly made it into my top 5. So I'm pulling from a really obscure cut for my number 4. It's a song called My King to Reign, written by an artist named Brother Paul. And when I say it's an obscure cut, Spotify says that Brother Paul has 1 monthly listener.
Is it you?
Actually, I mostly listen on YouTube, otherwise it would be. The YouTube version has 58 total views, and I'm probably a quarter or a third of those. Suffice to say, if everybody who listens to this podcast goes and listens to the song on YouTube, we're probably going to double its listen count, even if we only listen once. So this song's pretty obscure, and it's a simple voice and guitar version. I'm not even sure they had a professional studio. It's not a top 5 because of the recorded version, but the lyric is strong and the melody is amazing. The melody is really creative. The song is written in the key of D, and in the verses the melody's hanging out in that D major scale. But then the chorus section riffs on an E7 chord, which is just so unexpected. It goes on the notes, he sings the notes E, then G sharp, then B, and then E7th, the note D, which brings him back to the D scale. It is just such a creative melody. And I would love to hear a high quality studio version of this song sometime. The recorded version we have now is simple enough that I don't think casual listeners would be able to pick up from that version how good this song is. But it's such a good song, I had to put it in my top five.
Hmm. I remember, I remember being struck by that one as I was listening through the list too, and just being like, "Man, this is simple, but it's really good."
Yeah, it's really good. So, what do you have at number three?
At number three, again, another song that kind of fits into that category of taking the meaning of Psalm 2 and building upon the application and the effect that it has on the believer, which is Psalm 2, This Your Right to Do, by Francis Phipps. Um,
Okay.
the song essentially does the same thing as For Me, by Christy Nockels at number four.
Mm-hmm.
I just think it does it a little bit better,
Okay.
and does it a little bit more robustly in terms of pulling out the application, and is also really pretty. The melody's really pretty. Her voice is really pretty. Um, I confess, as I was listening to that song, I was like, I want to hear my wife sing this song.
Why
uh,
not? Do it.
so yeah, but that was where I brought in at number three.
I really went in a similar vein to your number four and number three for my number three. A song that pulls from the themes and somewhat reflects the wording of the psalm, but isn't like a verse for verse paraphrase. And
Mm-hmm.
so at number three, I have While the Nations Rage, written and recorded by Rich Mullins.
Mm-hmm.
This song is just a CCM classic. The title comes from Psalm 2. The first verse and chorus framed the psalm in our time and context, and then in that of Jesus and his earthly ministry. But then the second verse pulls more directly from the wording of the song, where Rich says, "The Lord in heaven laughs, he knows what is to come, while all the chiefs of state plan their big attacks against his anointed one." In the years before I did the Expository Songs Project and started looking specifically for songs from different books of the Bible, this was the song that came to mind when I thought about Psalm 2,
Mm-hmm.
other than Handel's Messiah, which I'll get to in the runners up. It's also the most widely known song in my top five. So for that reason, I definitely had to include it in my top five and give it a shout out here.
That song is my number one honorable mention, and I had a really hard time not having it in the top five, if for no other reason. Rich Mullins did so much in terms of kind of turn of the genre
Mm-hmm.
with Christian music, and so and it is one of the most widely known songs from Psalm 2. So it's right there at the top of my honorable mentions.
Other than Handel's Messiah, and maybe even up there with it, depending on the age of the Christian, I would say this song might be the best known song from Psalm 2 among uh, Christians in the current day, because there's no one hymn that's like the definitive hymn from Psalm 2. There's no
Yeah.
one Getty song or modern hymn that's like a definitive modern hymn.
Hmm.
At least of songs written in our lifetimes, this is probably the best known.
Hmm. I would agree with that.
So, what do you have at number two?
So at number two would probably be, in terms of more of a thematic reference, would probably be the
Mm-hmm.
only one that would closely rival in modern hymn being well known, would be Ancient of Days by
Mm-hmm.
CityAlight. And the main reason why I chose this song is because at first it seems like a passing reference to Psalm 2, but as you
Mm-hmm.
listen to the song, it really is more of a biblical theology, where Psalm 2 is just one passing reference. And they connect that idea of the Ancient of Days to the King in Zion, the Ancient of Days in Daniel, as well as the Ancient of Days in Revelation. And so I loved how they kind of did something different. They did something different than just truth and application, and something different than, word for word paraphrase of what the text says. And it felt very expositional as I was listening to it, and very theologically driven, which of course is, I'm a big fan of that. So you and I have talked a lot about City Light, and
Mm-hmm.
I am a particular fan of what they're doing as far as writing music that's very accessible, very attainable, very singable. Um, and so I have a real deep appreciation for what they're doing. This is a fantastic song.
Yeah. I really like that song too, and that's definitely in my top 10. It's definitely a runner up for me. Um, The only reason I didn't have it top 5 was because, in terms of sheer wording, it was a passing enough reference. And I had so many songs that covered so much of the psalm in my top 5. But I love that song. Definitely a runner-up for me. So at number 2, I have Why Do the Nations Rage, recorded by My Soul Among Lions and written by Jody Killingsworth and Jake Mentzel. This song, I think, is just firing on all cylinders. The lyric is tempestuous, but so is the source psalm. The melody is energetic, which is suitable for this psalm, and it has this Americana roots arrangement that's really catchy. I am on the fence whether to think of it as a congregational song. I think the lyric is just tempestuous enough that it wouldn't work in our context with an older, more traditional congregation. It might work as a special, but I don't think it would work congregationally. But I also think it might work really well in a younger congregation as a congregational song. But whether it's congregational or for personal edification, it's a really good treatment of this psalm, and it's just a really good song that's well worth learning.
Yeah, they had 2 songs from Psalm 2 on that album, and both of them were. I listened to the first one, and then I listened to the next one, and I just kept going back and forth. And I'm like, man, these are both really good. And I had not been exposed to their music until we did the Psalm 1 episode. And then the Psalm 1 episode was when I was like, who are these guys? I need to listen to more of these guys. These guys are great. And they definitely, it's like it's even kind of it's not a genre of its own, but it's like this bluegrassy, but not quite bluegrassy. I don't even know how to describe it as far as a genre. Okay, yeah.
Americana is like, it's heavy bluegrass influence, but pulls in instruments and arrangements that just wouldn't quite properly fit in bluegrass. Where, for those listening, a proper bluegrass band only has 5 or 6 instruments, or sometimes a subset of those. It has an acoustic guitar, acoustic bass, mandolin, banjo, fiddle, and maybe a dobro.
Yeah,
that's it. Like, if you go beyond that, you're kind of not doing bluegrass. And so Americana has other things going, but a good chunk of Americana is like this almost bluegrass, but not quite. The record label I worked for from 2010 to 2016 had 3 divisions, one of which was Americana, one of which was bluegrass. So I kind of got to see the distinctions between the two kind of up close and personal there.
Yeah, nice. But yeah, their stuff is great.
Yeah, it is. So what song do you have at number 1?
At number 1, I'm assuming, I know you'll be able to fill in the gaps for me.
Hopefully.
It's Jamie Soul's, I don't even think it's his arrangement, but it's the Genevan melody of Psalm 2. And the recorded version is a recorded version by Jamie Souls.
Yeah.
This one was probably my favorite of all of the songs that are just kind of paraphrasing the text, digging into it a little bit, and the melody is just sweet. It's simple, it's singable, it's very attainable, and it's good. I think it reflects the psalm, the mood of the psalm well. It lifts where it needs to lift. It's down where it needs to be down. And I just really like Jamie Souls. I love his musical interpretation of things. So I like I said, I don't think the Genevan tune, I think it's a pretty old tune. And so I think he was just playing that tune for the hymn. But really, really, really good.
I know he's done a lot in recent years of setting the Psalter his church uses, the psalm paraphrases they use to new melodies, but I do think there are some cases where he's sung them with the older melodies, and if that's what it said in the notes, that's probably what was going on here. But he's had a particular focus in the last 4 or 5 years probably of doing new psalm settings to go along with the ones he did in the 90s. So my number 1 song, I actually have number 2 and number 1 from the same artist. You already mentioned this song in passing. Behold Your King, from My Soul Among Lions, written by Jake Mentzel and Philip Moyer, is my number 1 song from this psalm. This song, where the last song was really focused on Psalm 2 throughout and was a proper expositional song, this song covers the grand arc of redemption. It starts at Jesus' birth and ends with his second coming and reign. And Psalm 2 makes its appearance quite appropriately when discussing the judgment that Jesus brings at his second coming. The verse says, "Behold your king with iron rod and robes of white all stained with blood. He comes to reign over sea and land, so bow your knee or take your stand." And that's referencing Psalm 2:9, which says, "You shall break them with a rod of iron. You shall dash them into pieces like a potter's vessel." It was with some hesitation that I put a song with a verse-long reference at number 1 when I have true expository songs in most of the other spots. But this is an amazing performance of an amazing song, and ultimately, I just thought it was the best song, period, in my top 5 and runners-up, and that's why I put it at the top of the list.
Yeah, nice.
It's just a really good song. So I believe we both have some runners-up. Which ones do you have?
Yeah, the only two, so I've got the pieces by My Soul Among the Lions mentioned as runners up, and the only reason why I didn't work them into the top 5 was my heart was really set on picking songs that are for the most part singable, usable in a corporate worship context. Not that the pieces by My Soul Among the Lions weren't, especially in the right context and even in our context. But the only two that I have on my runners-up that haven't already been mentioned are Why Do the Nations Rage? By, I believe it's pronounced the Shire Poets. It's spelled
S-H-I-Y-R.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that how it's pronounced? Shire?
Probably. I'm guessing it's a Tolkien reference, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah. But it's a very, very... definitely not a congregational song, not even close. But in terms of their melodic interpretation is just really good. The lyric is really strong too. So I really enjoyed that one. And then another one that really gripped me was Such Clever Follies by Brian Suave. I had not heard of him until doing this episode, prepping for this episode. And of course he had several songs from Psalm 2 in the list. And actually, I take that back. There is one that I'm going to throw in that you didn't have on the list, and that's your own song, "When Jesus Reigns in Zion," which I realize you probably didn't have it on the list because there's not a recorded.
It's not publicly released. That's the thank you though.
But you've sung it at our church,
yeah,
and it's a really really great song. That has really good builds. I particularly love the line in your song where it says, "Hear the Lord laugh like thunder roar," and so little Easter egg of fun fact in there for the listeners who would not see your song on the list there.
Thank you. Yeah, I like it, but there's no publicly recorded version. It's the only. Yeah. Otherwise, I might have considered mentioning it in some form or fashion. And my runners-up list has some overlap with yours, too. We've already mentioned Ancient of Days is on there. As for Me by Christy Nockels is on there. Both of Brian Suave's songs, Kiss the Sun and Such Clever Follies, are on there. I also have Why Do the Nations Rage by a Common Psalter, and all the pieces from Handel's Messiah. Like if I think of Psalm 2, I'm thinking of either Rich Mullins or Handel's Messiah. Why do the nations so furious, so rage together? Let us break their bonds asunder. He that dwelleth in heaven, and thou shalt break them. Those are all great pieces, out of the reach of most churches to perform, but excellent pieces.
Yeah.
Definitely. So we also have a new segment that we introduced in our last episode together called our Retuning Challenge. Lyrics that we think could use a retuning or a new melody. It's just really simple. We name the song, quote a verse or two, and let the words speak for themselves. I have one song for this section. How many do you have?
I narrowed it down to 2.
Why don't you start and I'll go in the middle then?
Okay, sounds good. So the first one, there wasn't an author mentioned, but the title is "The Exaltation and Universal Reign of Christ." Okay. And there's just so much that's good in this. I'll just read a handful of the lyrics. So why do the tribes and nations rage and form a vain design? Kings of the earth do set themselves, and princes plotting join against Jehovah and his Christ with one consent and say, let us asunder break their bands and cast their cords away. But he who sits in heaven will laugh, the Lord will them deride. In anger then to them he'll speak, in wrath to vex their pride. I love that particular line about vexing pride and just really essentially putting the wickedness of the world in its place.
Hmm.
So yeah, again, there wasn't an author named, but that was one. I think it was only when I was looking at it on Hymnary, I'm pretty sure it was only published in one hymnal ever.
And sometimes when a hymn is like that, it's just not credited in that hymnal and
Mm-hmm.
lost to history.
Yep.
In many cases, it was written by the publisher of that hymnal or somebody on the publishing team, but you just don't
Mm-hmm.
know unless you have access to that person's
Yep.
personal archive. So I have a much more familiar name. My one entry here, I have "Wherefore Do the Nations Rage" by Charles Wesley. All
Okay.
the verses are phenomenal, but I have to mention the last two, 7 and 8. Ye who spurn his righteous sway, yet he spares your breath, yet his hand, averse to slay, balances the bolt of death. Ere that dreadful bolt descends, haste before his feet to fall, kiss the scepter he extends, and adore him, Lord of all. I love that hymn.
The poetry alone is so
Mm-hmm.
strong. Where if it's never retuned, I mean, just to read the lyrics in a
Yes.
worship. I'm really glad you picked that one because I was like, I had it on as a third, and I was like, do I
Mm-hmm.
do three? Do I chip it to two? Do I do three? Do I chip it to two? And so I
Yeah.
decided to chip it to two. And so I'm really glad you picked that one because that
Cool.
was one that was sat on my list for a while. Um, on the text on the text side, the retuning challenge. The other retuning challenge song that I have also from a familiar name is an Isaac Watts piece.
Mm-hmm.
So there we go, representing both of probably two of the greatest, if not the greatest, hymn writers to ever live, at least in terms of how prolifically they wrote.
Yeah.
But the title of his piece, Maker and Sovereign Lord, um,
Mm-hmm.
Maker and Sovereign Lord of heaven and earth and seas, thy providence confirms thy word and answers thy decrees. Why did the Gentiles rage and Jews with one accord bend all their counsels to destroy the anointed of the Lord? Rulers and kings agree to form a vain design. Against the Lord their powers unite, against his Christ they join. The Lord derides their rage and will support his throne. He that hath raised him from the dead, hath owned him for his son. He asks and God bestows a large inheritance, for as the earth's remotest ends, his kingdom shall advance. Um, just a basic little 5 verse, 4 lines per verse, but the prose is just, I think, is rich. I don't know what it was about those guys that had the ability to run phrases together that just hit and hit hard.
Yeah. To try to get to the bottom of it would be a long discussion, well worth it, but
Mm-hmm.
require many years of study, some of which I've done, some of which I have yet to do.
Mm-hmm.
So as we wrap up, you have a book. Let's give that one a shout out if you would.
Yeah, I can send Daniel the link and link it in the show notes to where it can be purchased. Communing with God, Basic Guide to the Discipline of Prayer, and actually am doing the final proof of the manuscript for book two.
Neat.
Not a continuation of that book, but this one is more of a booklet, more of a mini book that's used as an evangelistic tool to help answer the big questions of life. Who am I? How did I get here? Where am I going? What's wrong? Those types of things. So look for that one available soon. That one will be published straight to Amazon, so that'll be an easier one to find.
Cool. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I always enjoy these conversations.
It's my pleasure.
Thanks. And listener, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend and subscribe to catch future episodes. You can also find past episodes and the free 72,000 entry expository song searchable database at expositorysongs.com. Thank you for listening.